Welcome to the Deep Dive. If you need a thorough understanding of a monumental subject, not just the surface facts, but the deep, surprising insights hidden in the research, then you are definitely in the right place. Today, we are focusing on a life that embodies heroism in a way, well, perhaps no fictional story ever could, Christopher Reeve.
That's exactly right. Our sources for this deep dive are pretty comprehensive, spanning his patrician roots, his intensely competitive drive to become a serious classical actor,
Right.
the unexpected global role that defined him, and then, of course, the catastrophic event that ultimately transformed him into one of the most powerful and, frankly, effective medical advocates of the last generation.
So our mission today is really to move past the image of the man of steel, the cape and everything, and appreciate the inner fortitude of the man himself. The director, the aviator, the tireless pioneer whose personal battle became this huge global movement for scientific progress. We're here to understand not just what happened to him, but how he chose to live because of it.
Exactly. Let's dive in.
Okay, let's unpack this. When we think of Christopher Reeve, you often associate him with the humble integrity of Clark Kent, right?
Okay.
The small-town boy who grew up strong. But his actual background, it was anything but humble. He came from serious American aristocracy.
No, absolutely. The pedigree is genuinely staggering.
Yep.
I mean, he wasn't just well off. He was descended from, foundational American history.
Foundational? How so?
Well, on his paternal side, he was a 12th generation descendant of William Bradford.
William Bradford of the Mayflower.
The very same. Not just a passenger, mind you, but governor of Plymouth Colony 5 times. So that's a lineage tied right back to the birth of the nation, essentially.
Wow, okay. And it didn't stop there, did it?
No, he also had roots in French aristocracy. And then on his mother's side, you find even more, let's say, governmental power. His maternal great-grandfather, Milan Pitney, served as an associate justice to the U.S. Supreme Court between 1913 and 1922. So it really paints this picture of intense expectation, high achievement just sort of built into his DNA.
And you can see how that expectation probably translated into immense self-discipline, especially growing up in Princeton, New Jersey.
Definitely. Academically, he was always on the honor roll. Athletically, the guy played 4 competitive sports: soccer, baseball, tennis, and hockey.
4 sports. And he had time for other things, too.
Apparently. He also managed to find time for the piano and sang as a soprano in the school choir. This wasn't just, a well-rounded kid. This was a hyper-disciplined achiever, pushing himself constantly.
And our sources really highlight why that pressure cooker existed, don't they? It seems deeply tied to his relationship with his father, Franklin Dollier Reeve.
Right. His father was a noted novelist and poet, and Christopher's own reflection on that dynamic is quite revealing.
What did he say?
He wrote that his father's love for his children always seemed tied to performance.
Oof, that's heavy.
It is. It meant every achievement, whether it was on the ice rink or, in the classroom, felt like a prerequisite for acceptance, for love.
Yeah.
That kind of psychological pressure to succeed, to perform constantly. Well, it became the engine that drove his entire life. It fueled this ambition that went way beyond just normal professional goals.
So when it came time for college, that internal discipline led him to a maybe slightly unusual choice. He got into multiple Ivies, right? Columbia, Princeton, Brown.
Yeah, all the big names. But he chose Cornell, which was deliberately far from Manhattan.
Why? Why the self-imposed distance from the New York City theater scene?
It was about keeping a promise, actually. He had assured his mother and his stepfather that he would complete his undergraduate degree. He knew that the pull of the theatrical world in New York would be constant.
Right, the temptation to drop out for a role.
Exactly. He feared if he stayed too close, he'd jump ship prematurely. So he valued that commitment more than the immediate opportunity. And he followed through, graduating with a double major in English and music theory.
Music theory. That's fascinating. But, okay, once that college commitment was fulfilled, the acting bug really bit hard.
Oh, yeah. He leveraged his academic standing, actually. He convinced the Cornell dean to count his first year at Juilliard's advanced program as his senior year of college.
Clever. And getting into Juilliard's advanced program, that's no small feat.
Not at all. It speaks volumes about his talent and his sheer drive. It was ferociously competitive. That year, apparently, they got something like 2,000 applications for the acting division.
2,000. And how many got in?
Only 20 students were accepted into the advanced program. 20.
And of those 20, the sources confirm only 2 were selected for this really intensive paired training.
Christopher Reeve and Robin Williams.
Just those 2, together.
Yep. It's extraordinary when you think about the depth of their bond forged in that, crucible of intense training. They were inseparable, often the only two students in a particular class. They navigated the extreme demands of classical training side by side.
What was that dynamic like?
Well, Reeve recalled Williams was just this whirlwind of energy, constantly performing comedy routines, keeping him laughing even when they were utterly exhausted. It was a relationship built on shared ambition, definitely, but also profound mutual support, a support that would prove incredibly vital decades later.
It's the kind of intense classical training that really sets you up for a life dedicated to, Shakespeare and Chekhov, which makes the advice he got from John Houseman all the more striking.
Oh, yeah, that infamous quote. Houseman, the iconic actor and head of the drama division at the time.
Fresh off his Oscar win.
Exactly, for The Paper Chase. He pulls Reeve aside and delivers this ultimatum, you can say.
What was it?
He said, "Mr. Reeve, it is terribly important that you become a serious classical actor, unless, of course, they offer you a shitload of money to do something else."
Wow. Basically permission to sell out if the price was right.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
It perfectly encapsulates the tension Reeve would live under for the next couple of decades. A direct instruction, almost, to betray his artistic integrity if the money was good enough.
And that immediately brings us into his early career path, where you can see that tension playing out almost immediately. He didn't exactly stick to the classical path for long.
Well, he couldn't really afford to. He left Juilliard a bit early because he needed money. Specifically, he needed to pay his Juilliard tuition.
So practical needs took over.
They did. He successfully auditioned for the CBS soap opera Love of Life. Initially, he was promised a minimal schedule, something that wouldn't interfere too much with his schoolwork.
But that didn't last.
No. His character, Ben Harper, became incredibly popular, so the demands on his time just grew and grew, eventually forcing him to make that difficult choice to leave the advanced program.
But even though he was on a soap opera, he wasn't just phoning it in, was he? He was still focused on his craft.
Absolutely not. He was dedicated to honing his craft in every single medium. He studied at the HB studio and found a really critical mentor in the stage director and actress Barbara Loden.
And what did she teach him?
Her fundamental piece of advice, according to the sources, was how not to play a role on the nose. Meaning don't just play the obvious emotion. Find the subtext, the subtlety, what's underneath. That insight would become really important later, informing how he played both the quiet strength of Superman and the deliberate awkwardness of Clark Kent.
That makes sense. And the pivot from daytime TV to the prestige of Broadway happened pretty quickly after that. He landed his Broadway debut in '76.
Yes, in A Matter of Gravity. And he was acting alongside the absolute legend, Katharine Hepburn.
Katharine Hepburn, what must that have been like?
Intense, to say the least. This was the point where the performance pressure from his childhood and the relentless demands of his early career really collided spectacularly. He was juggling the soap opera during the day and this demanding stage schedule at night.
How did he cope?
Apparently, not well. He admitted later he was basically replacing meals with candy bars and coffee just to keep up the pace.
Oh, dear. That sounds like a recipe for disaster.
And it was. The inevitable happened. A dramatic collapse right there on stage. He just fainted from sheer exhaustion and malnutrition during a performance.
Oh, my God. What did Hepburn do?
Well, the anecdote surrounding her reaction is just classic Hepburn. Apparently, instead of panicking, she just turned coolly to the stunned audience and declared, "This boy's a goddamn fool. He doesn't eat enough red meat."
Only Katharine Hepburn.
Exactly. But despite the huge age gap, 45 years, she really took him under her wing, became a sort of surrogate mentor and friend.
And she saw his potential early on.
She did. She told him he was destined to be a huge star. And, well, she wasn't wrong. The opportunity that would define his entire public identity arrived while he was doing an off-Broadway play called My Life.
This is the Superman audition story.
This is it. His stage producer, Svar Kesseltine, urged him to audition for this secret film project. The problem was, the producers had already rejected Reeve. Not once, not twice, but 3 separate times during the initial casting rounds.
Rejected 3 times. So what changed? How did he finally get through the door?
Persistence? But not his own, actually. It was the casting director, Lynn Stallmaster. She saw something in him that the producers Alexander and Ilya Salkind initially missed. Stallmaster just kept pushing and eventually secured him that crucial meeting with the director, Richard Donner.
And what did Reeve think when he finally read the script?
He was impressed. He read the apparently massive 300-page script and was struck by how seriously it treated the iconic comic book source material. And the fact that Marlon Brando and Gene Hackman had already signed on, well, that lent the project immediate gravitas.
Yeah, that would do it.
It convinced Reeve this wasn't some cheesy comic book movie, but potentially a major motion picture event.
But physically, he wasn't quite Superman yet, was he? He was tall, 6'4", but pretty slim.
Right. He considered himself slim, weighing only about 188 pounds at the time. That simply wouldn't cut it for the Man of Steel.
So cue the transformation montage.
Pretty much. He needed a massive, rapid physical overhaul. He embarked on this incredibly intense 2-month regimen, supervised by David Prowse.
David Prowse. Hang on, that name sounds familiar.
It should. Prowse, for those listening who might not know, was the man physically inside the Darth Vader suit in the original Star Wars trilogy.
No way! The Dark Lord was training the superhero. That's amazing.
It's a fantastic bit of trivia, isn't it? Reeves' training was absolutely grueling. Daily running, 2 hours of weightlifting, and 90 minutes on the trampoline to help him prepare for all the wire work, the flying effects.
And did it work?
Oh, yeah. He successfully added 30 pounds. It's nearly 14 kilograms of pure muscle. That physical discipline, the one honed way back in his youth in Princeton, was absolutely critical here.
But he always maintained that the real challenge of the role wasn't just the physical part, it was the duality, right? Playing two distinct characters in one film.
Exactly. He aimed to portray Superman not as just a simple brute, but as a modern male image of gentleness and vulnerability. Something quite new for that era, actually. And then for Clark Kent, he specifically drew inspiration from classic Hollywood comedy.
Which film?
He based the clumsy, fumbling, thoroughly incompetent Clark Kent on Cary Grant's classic screwball comedy performance in the 1938 film Bringing Up Baby.
Ah, I can see that.
He made sure Clark was always dropping things, bumping into walls, just generally being the most unthreatening person in any room.
But there was a crucial intellectual note, wasn't there? A piece of insight that kind of unified those two seemingly opposite roles.
Yes, and that came from the creative consultant, Tom Mankiewicz. That note was really the key to his whole performance.
What was the note?
Mankiewicz told Reeve that he was always playing Superman. Clark Kent was merely Superman playing Clark Kent. It was a disguise, a performance within a performance.
That's brilliant.
It allowed Reeve to ground the character, the internal power, the integrity. It never wavered, even if the exterior persona was clumsy and weak.
And the results were just phenomenal. The film used these state-of-the-art practical effects, truly groundbreaking for their time.
Especially the flying sequences.
Right. And it earned a staggering $300.2 million worldwide, and that's unadjusted for inflation. Reeve himself won a BAFTA award for Most Promising Newcomer. Instant global fame.
Margot Kidder, his Lois Lane, later reflected that Reeve really understood he had done something meaningful with that role. He somehow managed to capture this cultural ideal of integrity. However, the subsequent years proved, let's say, creatively disappointing for him.
He liked Superman II, though, didn't he? Despite the behind-the-scenes drama.
He did consider Superman II his favorite, yes.
Yeah.
Even with the dramatic firing of the original director, Richard Donner, midway through production.
Yeah.
But then came the decline, really starting with Superman III.
Right. What went wrong there?
That film severely strained Reeves' commitment to the whole franchise. The director, Richard Lester, leaned really heavily into comedy, essentially turning the film into a vehicle for Richard Pryor.
Who was huge at the time.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But Reeve felt the film completely betrayed the integrity of the original script and the character he'd worked so hard to build.
And then, Superman IV. The Quest for Peace. The less said, the better. Is that fair?
That's pretty much Reeves' own view of it, yes.
Yeah.
He was so frustrated by that point that he only agreed to star if he was given partial creative control, which led to the whole nuclear disarmament plot.
Which sounds noble on paper, but...
But the execution was hampered by the studio. Cannon Films, who were known for running these extremely tight, low-budget action pictures, basically slashed the budget. They'd agreed on a certain amount, but then cut it down to a meager $17 million.
$17 million. For a Superman movie, even back then, that's tiny.
It was disastrously low. The special effects suffered tremendously as a result. The film was a critical and box office bomb, and it really just confirmed Reeves' desire to pivot away entirely from the blockbuster superhero machine. He was done.
So, if the commercial route, the blockbuster path, was now unsatisfying for him, where did that deep internal drive for performance lead him next? Let's talk about his deliberate search for more complex roles, often back on stage, and also some of the astonishingly high-stakes personal hobbies he pursued.
Right. His career choices after hanging up the cape were very calculated retreats back towards artistic merit. He actively sought roles that were the complete antithesis of the simple action hero.
Like Somewhere in Time.
Exactly. The 1980 film, Somewhere in Time. Now, it was critically panned upon release, but he absolutely adored shooting it on Mackinac Island, called it his favorite film experience. It was a gentle, romantic role, very different from Superman.
And it found its audience later, didn't it? Became this massive cult classic through cable TV and video rentals.
It really did, which shows the enduring nature of that specific, quieter performance. And here's a beautiful little connecting thread. The dedicated fans of that film, who form the international network of Somewhere in Time enthusiasts, Insight, they call themselves.
Insight, okay.
They later raised over $20,000 for the Christopher and Dana Reeve Foundation after his accident. So that deep connection to his gentler work, it really remained strong over the years.
That's lovely. But the stage, that seemed to be his true artistic refuge, right?
Absolutely. He became a regular fixture at the prestigious Williamstown Theater Festival, performing classics like Chekhov's The Cherry Orchard and The Rover.
And he took on a particularly challenging role there, didn't he?
Yes, most significantly, he received excellent reviews for playing a disabled Vietnam veteran in Lanford Wilson's play 5th of July on Broadway.
Wow, playing a disabled character.
Yeah. And if you look for moments of foreshadowing in his life, this performance, playing a physically challenged character who still absolutely commands the emotional center of the story, it's incredibly resonant looking back.
Definitely. But let's step away from the stage for a moment and look at his private life, because it reveals this deep-seated need for maybe high-stakes, hands-on control that seems to parallel his professional ambition. His hidden passions were, well, pretty extreme.
He was, by any measure you could use, a master aviator. He held 6 different pilot licenses.
6? What were they?
Let's see. Private, instrument, multi-engine, commercial, instructor, and even glider pilot.
Good grief, that's serious dedication.
And we're not just talking about weekend recreational flying. This man flew solo across the entire Atlantic Ocean, not once, but twice.
Solo across the Atlantic. That requires profound skill, incredible technical precision, and just absolute nerve.
It really does. It speaks to a personality that thrived on managing complexity and risk, you know.
It feels like it connects directly to that need for control you mentioned. When you're flying solo over an ocean, you are everything. The pilot, the navigator, the engineer. You are solely responsible for managing these potentially overwhelming odds.
Precisely. And he also used these skills for good, didn't he? Serving as a pilot for the Environmental Air Force.
Right, showing that his commitment to activism was deeply practical, not just, lending his name to a cause.
Exactly. And he was equally serious about sailing. He actually lived aboard his Swan 40 yacht, the Chandelle, while he was filming The Bostonians. Later, he owned a much larger Cambria 46 sloop called Sea Angel.
Sailing the New England coast.
Yep, the coast, the Caribbean, even sailed it to Bermuda. Again, this wasn't just a casual weekend hobby. It was an intense, physically demanding lifestyle choice.
So when you connect this back to his career choices, his love of these really demanding hobbies seems to perfectly explain why he consistently turned down massive commercial films, roles that would have made him exponentially richer.
That's the logic, yeah. He turned down the lead roles in huge hits like American Gigolo, Fatal Attraction, Lethal Weapon, even The Bounty.
Those were defining films of the 80s and 90s. Why consciously walk away from that kind of massive success?
Because, for him, they simply didn't fulfill his artistic criteria.
Yeah.
He felt those parts, especially the action-oriented ones, were based purely on physique and relied on, frankly, poorly constructed scripts. He famously stated that those roles could be played by anyone with a strong physique.
So it was about artistic integrity over fame or money.
Completely. To him, taking those parts would have been a betrayal of the intense classical training he'd fought so hard for at Juilliard. He was always looking for character depth, complexity, not just marketability.
He prioritized the validation of his craft over box office figures, and he did eventually find that critical validation, didn't he? Though perhaps not in another blockbuster.
Exactly right. His supporting role in the 1993 Merchant Ivory film, The Remains of the Day, that was the film he consistently cited as the work he was most proud of.
Playing opposite Anthony Hopkins and Emma Thompson.
Yes. And the director, James Ivory, later commented that Reeve was really undervalued by the critics.
Yeah.
Because they were so used to thinking of him as Superman. He was finally starting to gain that respect he craved for his acting abilities alone, separate from the cape.
And as his acting career matured, he also shifted into directing and found immediate critical success behind the camera, too.
That pivot was really crucial. He won an Emmy for an informational special called Without Pity, a film about abilities.
Without Pity, what was that about?
It showcased stories of people living with severe physical disabilities. So you can see that subject matter was clearly already close to his heart, even then.
Wow, that's poignant.
It really is. And his feature directorial debut, the HBO film In the Gloaming, was a major critical success, earning 5 Emmy nominations. He was clearly moving into this new phase of creative control, exploring deeper artistic territory.
He was focused, he was respected, he was thriving creatively, which makes the sudden, unpredictable, and utterly devastating stop on May 27, 1995, all the more impactful. Which brings us to segment 4, the defining accident and the path to recovery.
We've already established his love for physically demanding hobbies, and equestrian eventing was certainly one of them. He had started riding seriously back in 1985 for the film Anna Karenina. By 1989, he was eventing competitively.
Which is a dangerous sport, right?
Oh, notoriously so. Known for its danger and intensity.
Tell us about the specifics of the accident itself. It wasn't some huge, dramatic fall over a massive obstacle, was it?
No, and that's part of the terrible tragedy of it. It happened at a relatively routine fence, only about 1 meter tall. It was a W-shaped fence during an event in Culpeper, Virginia. His horse, a thoroughbred named Buck, apparently hesitated or just refused the jump right at the last second.
And Reeve was caught off guard.
He was leaned forward, apparently had a fairly loose hold on the reins, and was essentially just thrown clear over the horse's head.
Landing head first.
Witnesses reported that as he fell, his hands somehow got tangled in the reins, actually pulling the bridle and the bit right off the horse. He landed incredibly hard, head first on the far side of the fence. The force of that impact was so immense that it shattered his first and second cervical vertebrae, the C1 and C2.
Right at the top of the spine.
Exactly. These vertebrae are absolutely critical, sitting right at the base of the skull. The resulting spinal cord injury instantly rendered him paralyzed from the neck down, and his breathing stopped immediately.
Complete paralysis. It's terrifying to even imagine.
Paramedics, thankfully, arrived within just 3 minutes and managed to get air into his lungs, which undoubtedly saved his life right there. He was rushed to the University of Virginia Medical Center.
And then faced days of uncertainty.
5 harrowing days, apparently, of heavy sedation and delirium. Then, the devastating reality was explained to him. He was a C1, C2 quadriplegic, completely reliant on a ventilator to breathe. And in that absolute darkest moment, trapped inside his own body, overwhelmed by terror, he made a plea to his wife, Dana.
He mouthed the words, "Maybe we should let me go."
Yeah. And Dana's response. It became this incredible rallying cry of devotion. Our sources reveal the profound weight and love in her words. She tearfully replied something like, "I will support whatever you want to do because this is your life and your decision, but I want you to know that I'll be with you for the long haul no matter what. You're still you and I love you."
Wow. Just
that moment, that unconditional love, and also the sudden realization that his young children needed him, it convinced him he had to fight. He had to somehow turn that intense self-discipline he'd always possessed toward survival and recovery.
But before that fight could truly begin, he faced this incredibly complex and dangerous surgery, right? With only a 50-50 chance of survival.
That's right. He was grappling with just paralyzing fear and despair there in the ICU when apparently the door burst open.
And this is where the famous Robin Williams story comes in.
This is it. One of the most touching and frankly hilarious anecdotes in modern celebrity history. In walks this short fellow sporting a blue scrub hat, wearing a yellow surgical gown, and speaking in this thick, comical Russian accent.
Announcing himself as
a proctologist who was scheduled to perform an immediate rectal exam on Mr. Reeve.
It was Robin Williams.
It was Robin Williams, in full character, honoring a promise he'd made years before to always keep him laughing. He was actually dressed up in character from his film 9 Months, which was about to come out.
And Reeve.
Reeve wrote later that for the very first time since the accident, he laughed. Out loud. That single moment, that unexpected burst of pure humanity and humor from his oldest friend, it broke the spell of terror. It helped him believe he could actually face the terrifying fight ahead.
And that fight began with this pioneering, incredibly complex surgery performed by Dr. John A. Jane, fusing the skull to the spinal column. How do they even do that?
It was an extremely delicate and, frankly, pretty brutal procedure. Since the C1 and C2 vertebrae were completely shattered, they had to somehow stabilize the spine right at the very top. The surgeon used these thin wires, inserted underneath the laminae, the bony plates of the vertebrae.
Okay.
Then bone was harvested from Reeve's own hip, a complex bone graft, and that was used to fuse between the C1 and C2 vertebrae. Finally, a titanium pin was inserted. This whole complex scaffold essentially fused his skull directly to his spinal column, ensuring stability and preventing any catastrophic damage from even slight movement.
Incredible surgical work. And after the surgery, the focus shifted immediately to the long, painstaking road of scientific recovery and rehabilitation.
Yes, at the Kessler Rehabilitation Center in New Jersey. And this is where his theatrical discipline truly transformed into physical discipline for survival.
How so?
That's the key connection everyone points to. He approached rehab with the exact same intensity he'd approached Gilliard, or learning to fly solo across the Atlantic. He learned to operate his sip-and-puff electric wheelchair by blowing air through a straw. He adopted this fierce attitude, famously saying he was competing against decay.
Using that performance mindset.
Absolutely. He leveraged that immense self-discipline, honed over decades of professional performance, to just keep pushing, keep working, even against what seemed like overwhelming medical odds.
His commitment to aggressive physical therapy was pretty revolutionary at the time, wasn't it? 4 or 5 hours a day.
Yeah, using specialized machines, functional electrical stimulation, working constantly on the premise that intense, repeated therapy could actually spur nervous system regeneration, wake up dormant pathways. And this commitment led to really astounding progress, particularly given the extreme severity of his injury.
What kind of progress are we talking about?
By 2002, which was 7 years after the accident, he was actually regaining small movements and sensation across about 65% of his body. He could feel needle pricks, he could distinguish between hot and cold temperatures, and critically, he developed proprioception.
Remind us what proprioception is and why that's so significant.
Sure. Proprioception is basically your sense of knowing where your body parts are in space without having to look at them. It's fundamental to movement and balance. Regaining this sense indicates that neural pathways, which had previously been completely silent below the injury, were starting to communicate again, which, for that level of injury, is monumental.
And his official diagnostic classification improved too, right? Which is the most objective measure of progress in spinal cord injury research.
It really is the gold standard. Initially, after the accident, he was classified as ASIA Impairment Scale Grade A.
Meaning?
ASIA means total motor and sensory loss below the level of the injury. Complete paralysis, no signals getting through. But by 2002, thanks to his relentless exercise regimen and sheer force of will, his classification improved to ASIA C.
And going from ASIA A to C represents what kind of functional return?
It represents a significant return of function. ASIA C indicates that there is now some degree of muscle movement, even if it's not functionally useful yet, and some sensation below the level of injury. For an injury as severe as a high cervical C1-C2 break, that level of progress was frankly nothing short of miraculous. It was a testament to his unwavering belief that the body was capable of repair if you pushed it hard enough.
And there was one final major scientific milestone in his life, which occurred in 2003, that dramatically improved his day-to-day quality of life.
Ah, yes, the diaphragm pacing procedure. He became only the third patient in the entire U.S. to receive this implant at the time.
And what does that device do?
It uses electrodes, surgically implanted, to directly stimulate the diaphragm muscle to contract, essentially mimicking natural breathing, and enabling the patient to breathe independently of a ventilator for periods of time.
What was the practical human difference this implant made for him? It must have been huge.
Oh, it was more than just physical improvement. It was about restoring these fundamental elements of his humanity. It allowed him to breathe normally off the ventilator for up to 18 hours a day. Think about that, escaping the constant hiss and rhythm of the machine.
And other benefits, too.
Critically, yes. It restored his sense of smell, which had been completely lost due to the lack of natural airflow. And perhaps most importantly for him as an actor and communicator, it allowed him to speak naturally and fluidly again, without having to carefully time his words around the ventilator's pump cycle. It was a return to normal, easy communication after 8 long years.
Amazing. Moving now into segment 5, this incredible dedication to scientific and personal recovery immediately translated into his powerful new role, global activist. But it's really important to note, isn't it, that his political fire, his activism, was burning long before the accident.
Oh, absolutely. His engagement started remarkably early. At just 15 years old, he campaigned for Robert F. Kennedy back in 1968.
Wow, 15.
Yeah. He was actively involved in environmental causes, serving as a pilot for the Environmental Air Force, as we mentioned earlier, and he was also a key active member of the Creative Coalition TCC.
What was TCC's focus?
It's a nonprofit organization focused specifically on educating celebrities and figures in the arts community so they could speak knowledgeably and effectively about important political and social issues.
So this wasn't just about lending his famous name. He was genuinely committed to understanding the complex issues he spoke about.
Exactly. And the story of his 1987 trip to Chile is probably the most powerful testament to his pre-injury bravery and his deep commitment to human rights.
What happened in Chile?
Well, Chile at the time was ruled by the dictator Augusto Pinochet, who had threatened to execute 77 Chilean actors simply for protesting his regime. Reeve, hearing about this, flew down to Santiago and helped lead an international protest march right there in the capital.
That took incredible courage. What was the local reaction?
It was huge. Apparently, a cartoon ran in a local newspaper showing Christopher Reeve, dressed as Superman, carrying Pinochet by the collar, with the caption asking something like, "Where will you take him, Superman?"
Huh, that's fantastic.
His intervention was seen as so consequential, so impactful, that he was later awarded the Grand Cross of the Order of Bernardo Higgins, which is Chile's highest possible distinction for foreigners. He literally used his celebrity as a shield to protect others.
And he applied that same platform to domestic issues back home too, didn't he? Famously speaking out against some of Donald Trump's development projects in New York in the late 80s.
He did. He delivered this really powerful speech where he directly challenged Trump's expansive ambitions for development on the west side of Manhattan, calling them the American dream gone berserk.
Strong words.
Very strong. He argued that if dreams, even ambitious ones, step on the lives of ordinary people and ruin the quality of their life in their neighborhood, you have to be stopped. For Reeve, celebrity clearly came with a profound moral obligation to speak up and protect the vulnerable.
So following his injury, all that passion, all that commitment became laser-focused and truly monumental. Disability advocacy and driving scientific progress for spinal cord injury research, his initial legislative focus was deeply practical, wasn't it?
Extremely practical. His first big fight was for insurance reform. As you can imagine, catastrophic injuries like his quickly exhaust standard insurance policies. At the time, the typical lifetime cap was only around $1 million.
Which sounds like a lot, but for quadriplegia.
It often lasted only a few years, given the immense cost of round-the-clock care, equipment, therapies. So he lobbied aggressively for a bill to raise that cap significantly to $10 million. That specific effort was narrowly defeated in 1997, unfortunately. But he later helped pass the critically important Work Incentives Improvement Act.
What did that act do?
It fundamentally changed the rules, allowing disabled people to return to work without immediately losing their crucial government benefits like Medicare or Medicaid. It removed a huge barrier to employment.
But his biggest impact, the one that truly changed the landscape of scientific research globally, was his highly visible, highly public campaign for expanded federal funding for embryonic stem cell research.
Yes, and this put him in direct public opposition to President George W. Bush's administration. The Bush administration had imposed these severe limits on the number of federally approved embryonic stem cell lines that scientists were allowed to use for research.
Why the limits?
The rationale was primarily ethical and political, tied to the source of the stem cells. While Reeve initially acknowledged that the limited funding Bush allowed was maybe a small step in the right direction, he became a ferocious vocal opponent of those restrictions once scientists discovered a major technical problem with those existing approved lines.
What was the critical flaw they found?
It turned out many of them were contaminated. They had been cultured, grown in the lab, using mouse feeder cells in the very early research stages. This introduced a significant risk of transmitting animal viruses to any potential human subjects down the line.
So the approved lines might not even be safe for human therapies.
Exactly. Reeve argued forcefully that the restriction was not just scientifically short-sighted, but morally questionable given the potential of the research. He demanded open-ended, non-politicized scientific inquiry, and he leveraged his incredibly powerful image. The hero brought low, confined, but fighting to give a tangible human face to this very complex political and scientific debate.
And his perspective wasn't just limited to the U.S., was it? He looked globally for solutions.
That's a crucial detail. In 2003, feeling frustrated by the political gridlock and scientific stagnation in the U.S. regarding stem cells, he traveled to Israel.
Why Israel specifically?
Because Israel, at that time, was rapidly becoming a world center for spinal cord injury research. They benefited from strong government support and faced fewer political restrictions on stem cell work compared to the U.S. He called the trip a privilege, praising Israel's proactive rehabilitation facilities and their first-rate research infrastructure. He wanted to learn and bring ideas back.
The ultimate measure of his activism, though, has to be the sheer amount of money raised and the fundamental shift in scientific focus that followed his advocacy.
The financial numbers are just staggering. The Christopher and Dana Reeve Foundation has, to date, given over $140 million specifically to research projects and provided more than $46 million in quality-of-life grants for people living with paralysis and their families.
That's transformative funding.
It is. And the journalist Jerome Groopman summarized this shift perfectly back in 2003. He noted that there was, and I quote, essentially no substantial funding of spinal cord research before Reeve's injury, and now it is one of the hottest areas in neurobiology. Scientists are flocking to work in it because science follows the money. Reeve almost single-handedly monetized and energized an entire field of research.
Incredible. Finally, in our last segment, let's look at his final creative work and the enduring legacy he left behind. Because even confined to his wheelchair, dependent on others for almost everything, he continued to act and direct.
He absolutely did. And he continued to choose roles that were creatively challenging and often deeply resonant with his new reality. In 1998, he starred in a television remake of Hitchcock's classic Rear Window.
Playing the Jimmy Stewart role.
Exactly. Playing a paralyzed character confined to his apartment who believes he witnesses a potential crime across the way. For that performance, he won a Screen Actors Guild Award. The irony, the echo of his own confinement in the role was incredibly palpable and powerful.
And he made those two hugely impactful guest appearances on the show Smallville, didn't he?
Yes. Those were profoundly moving moments, I think, for fans and critics alike. In 2003, he guest starred twice as Dr. Virgil Swan, this brilliant, somewhat secretive scientist who helps the young Clark Kent understand his Kryptonian origins.
A passing of the torch, in a way.
Absolutely. His appearances were an immense ratings success for the WB network at the time, setting audience records. It felt like a beautiful, symbolic return to the franchise that made him famous, but in this new, wise mentor role.
And he was working creatively right up until the very end.
He was. His final directorial projects included the Brooke Ellison story in 2004, which was another story about overcoming disability. And he was actively directing the animated film Everyone's Hero at the time of his passing.
Yeah.
He never stopped pursuing creative control and telling stories.
Tragically, though, he died far too young, only 52.
Yeah. On October 10, 2004, he suffered a sudden cardiac arrest. It was apparently following an adverse reaction to an antibiotic he was taking.
For what?
He was receiving treatment for an infected pressure ulcer, or bed sore, which is unfortunately a common, often life-threatening complication for people living with severe quadriplegia due to immobility.
But the work, the fight, the foundation, it didn't end with his death, did it? His wife, Dana, who showed such powerful commitment right from that moment in the ICU, really carried the torch forward.
She did, immediately and powerfully. Dana, who was an accomplished actress and singer herself, instantly took over leadership of the foundation, ensuring that his mission continued completely uninterrupted.
But then tragedy struck again, didn't it?
Unbelievably, yes. Dana was diagnosed with lung cancer, despite never having smoked, and she passed away less than 2 years later in 2006. In recognition of her absolutely pivotal role, not just in sustaining his life, but also his cause, the organization was very fittingly renamed the Christopher and Dana Reeve Foundation.
His influence now transcends even the foundation, doesn't it? It's become permanently institutionalized in American law.
That's right. In 2009, President Barack Obama signed the Christopher and Dana Reeve Paralysis Act into law. It was specifically designed to accelerate research into paralysis and, importantly, also improve the quality of life for those living with spinal cord injuries and other paralyzing conditions. It ensures that the funding momentum and focus that he started continues indefinitely at a national level.
And the public continues to remember and honor his memory.
Definitely. Whether it's through recent projects like the 2024 documentary Superman, the Christopher Reeve story, or symbolic gestures like the Empire State Building being illuminated in the Foundation's signature colors, blue, yellow, red, orange, on the 20th anniversary of his death just recently, his impact remains very visible.
What an absolutely extraordinary journey, from this high-pressure patrician background that demanded constant performance, through the global, iconic role that initially defined him, and finally through the catastrophic accident that, ironically, allowed him to realize his greatest potential, his truest strength. Christopher Reeve leveraged the platform of a fictional hero to become this intensely intentional, incredibly effective advocate, defying physical limits and setting a whole new standard for resilience and purpose.
His life really offers such a profoundly instructive narrative, doesn't it? And I think this raises an important question, maybe a provocative thought for you, the listener. If Christopher Reeve could leverage a role he initially struggled with, Superman, and then leverage the ultimate physical limitation paralysis to gain a global platform for activism and drive massive scientific and social change, well, how can we, each of us, leverage the defining parts of our own stories, even the most painful parts or the limiting ones? How can we use those to drive meaningful change in the world around us? What is the unexpected strength hidden in your own narrative that's just waiting to be deployed?
That's definitely food for thought. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.
Until next time.